So I want to welcome all our attendees tonight. My name is William Freeman. I'm the manager of Higher Education Justice Initiatives at the Education Trust. And I'm joined here today by three of my esteemed colleagues, co-students, and I consider them friends. I have Kenard Johnson joining us tonight, Omari, Amili, and Alexa Garza. So I'm wondering if I could just take a minute before we get started on tonight's webinar, Affirmative Action and Student Loan Forgiveness for Justice Impacted. I want to give each of the panelists opportunity to introduce themselves. I will start with you, Kenard. I have you first on my screen.
Kenard Johnson. I am a Washingtonian, returned citizen who has many years, unfortunately, contact with the legal system. I hold a bachelor's degree in American Studies from Goucher College. I currently work at the DC Office of the Attorney General in the Consumer Protection Division as a paralegal specialist. And I recently graduated from Georgetown certificate paralegal program. Thank you.
And then I have Omari Amili on my screen.
Honored to be here. I'm also a Washingtonian, but I'm from the other side of the map, Washington State, the great Northwest. I'm somebody who came from a struggle, didn't have a lot of positive influences, and how the story goes. Found myself incarcerated on 30 felonies for bank fraud. Upon my release, I turned to post-secondary education, gone from a GED to a master's degree, and been doing a lot of good work ever since. I wrote a book called Transforming Society's Failure from Felonies to College Degrees, and I am a director of teaching and advancement at a Seattle-based nonprofit called Choose 180 that works in the juvenile justice area. We do school-based diversion work, preventing youth from being suspended and expelled. We also have legal system diversion programs where we are preventing young people from being charged with crimes where they never have to see a court for complete pre-filing diversion. And we do a lot of other things, youth advocacy and things of that nature. And I also teach criminal justice at the University of Washington.
Thank you for that, Omar. And then I want to introduce, lastly, amongst our three panelists, but certainly not least, Alexa Garza.
Certainly. Hello, everyone. Alexa Garza, graduate student with Texas Women's University here in Texas, and former Justice Fellow for the first cohort, along with William and Omari. Super excited to be here. I'm system impacted, served 19 years, received my higher education while inside, and just know firsthand the barriers and obstacles for incarcerated learners and what's not looking like with Pell being implemented on one hand, but also the affirmative action Supreme Court rulings that have fallen within the past couple of weeks. So really excited to engage in the conversation with everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. Just want to share before we get started. I ask that the panelists or the participants who are in attendance that we use the chat for general discussion and use the question and answer section for if you have questions. We'll save those for the end and circle back and hopefully from a lived experience perspective, contextualize some of the things you guys are thinking. But no, thank you for that, Alexa. So jumping right in. So a few weeks ago, the Supreme Court shot down Joe Biden's promise to student borrowers to forgive up to $400 billion in federal student aid, which essentially would have rose at the individual level to about $20,000. So I'm wondering if we could just take time and kind of level set and everyone speak to how has higher education and student loan debt impacted your lives or at all? Like, what is your story with student loan debt?
So are we just jumping in here?
Yeah, cool. I mean, we can do it that way, show of hands. So Omari, if you got it, you go. I want everybody to hit it.
Oh no, I was just trying to figure out the flow, but it sounded like Mr. Johnson here had something to say.
So let's do Kenard, Omari, Alexa, the same way we did introductions. Does that work?
I'm good with it, but so I attended Regis University in the early 90s, a Jesuit school based in Denver, Colorado. I was incarcerated in the Colorado Department of Corrections, serving a 12-year sentence. And back then, the Pell Grant was something that we had access to. People incarcerated, we could get a Pell Grant. And so I think I went to school for like maybe a year or two, or enough time to earn about 45 credits, just shy of getting an associate degree. And then the Clinton administration and the people up on Capitol Hill decided to do away with the Pell Grant for incarcerated persons. When they did away with that, a few people were still able to go to school, but by then a student loan had caught up with me and I was in default. And that student loan haunted me for the default status haunted me for a long time. So, you know, with a default, you're not eligible for a Pell Grant. So even if they would have did some type of forgiveness back then, you know, the question I would have had, would they forgive a person who was in default way back then? So, and I think that question still is relevant today for many people that's incarcerated who probably didn't have good management skills with their money, who ended up being in default before they got incarcerated, or due to being incarcerated, they weren't able to make payments, and through pretrial and all that, a payment wasn't really on their mind. Then they go to their facility where they're serving their time and they find out that they're in default. And it hinders them from either getting into a vocational program or, you know, post-secondary education. So that's definitely a problem that I can see that would affect a lot of people, and including me back then.
Thank you for that, Kenard.
Sure.
Omari?
Yeah, so for me, you know, student loans have really been a gift and a curse. You know, it was a gift in certain ways, in that I had to make a decision. You know, I got out of prison, and within 3 months I was beginning college, and I was a single father at the time with 2 kids to take care of, had to get them to daycare, had to go to class, and I had a lot of tough decisions to make. Do I go work full time, or do I go to school full time? Doing both, like, realistically, was it set up to fail? You know, I know there's a lot of people who do it, but with my circumstances, having never worked before, having never taken education serious before, I'm like, look, I can't sign up for too much at this front end. I'm just getting started. I don't even know how this stuff's gonna work out. So student loans really allowed me, like, I didn't know anything at the beginning about financial aid, priority deadlines, you know, what dates you got to fill out the FAFSA to get the most grant money and things of that nature. I was really just trying to find my way. So there was times that I missed those deadlines, and the only way I was able to fill certain gaps was with student loans. So for me, I didn't really think twice about taking them out. I'm like, look, it's either this, or I was working at the Old Country Buffet, dead end, minimum wage job, poverty trap, eventually go back to prison type of stuff. So I'm like, look, okay, so I'm gonna just take the loans out, and I'm gonna keep on pressing with my education. Then I ended up earning my associates, then earning my bachelor's. And once I got to grad school, it was like all that's available to you is loans. You see, if you want to get your master's degree, you're going to have to take out loans for every single dollar of your cost of attendance. Or you can just stick with your bachelor's in psychology and see what the world has for you out there, you know? And for me, I was like, man, I still got 30 felonies on my record. I need to be competitive with these people who ain't never been locked up before, got all kinds of different experiences. I have to take out the loans. So while I'm sitting here trying to build my life up, pursuing education, with social mobility being one of the core motivating factors for me. I want to be able to make a living, make it where my kids don't have to grow up in poverty, make it where we have opportunities to do things that I didn't have to do as a kid, right? So while I'm trying to improve my circumstances and experience social mobility, I'm actually digging a deep hole, a hole that I had no clue that I would probably never be able to climb out of. I owe $150,000 in student loan debt, you know, and like for me, when I heard, oh, we're gonna get loan forgiveness for $20,000, I'm gonna be honest, I was like, man, for somebody like me, that's almost insignificant. Like, I still owe so much money that I don't have any light at the end of the tunnel for paying off this debt, unless I get like the 10-year public service loan forgiveness or things of that nature. So student loans for me, it's been a gift and a curse. When I heard about that 20,000, I was like, man, I really hope this can go further. Because when you think about the fact that I'm a Black man who came from a struggle, who was failed by systems repeatedly, the K through 12 system, the foster care system, just the legal system, every system I've ever come in contact with has failed me. So is this really the only option? The only way to climb out of this hole is to go into a debt that's going to last forever? I don't think so. And I've actually heard examples of some people who got their education paid for, fully funded. I didn't have that guidance. I didn't have those programs, those mentors, things of that nature. So that's my perspective on student loans.
Absolutely. And to second what Omari said, in the pursuit of education, many students have taken on student debt. It's just the norm for the majority of us to get our education. But after like the federal crime bill and the 1994 crime bill banned Pell Grants for incarcerated learners, loans became the only means for incarcerated people to access higher ed. So you have to understand, like, they created this situation, and then Pell Grants being reinstated, there's just one factor to pursue higher education. Not all students are eligible for Pell Grants. And even if the student was eligible, the grants don't cover all the costs associated with running like a higher education program and everything that goes with it. So yeah, while, this is helping the Pell Grant reinstatement, and I did have heard about double Pell and them, reinstating this, unfortunately, this like student loan debt is something of a reality that is affecting everyone, and successful professionals like Omari or my husband, hypothetically, he has a PhD and he has student loan debt that he'll probably never pay off, because it is the reality of our pursuit of education, and that is just wrong on every level. And if you're thinking about incarcerated learners and what that looks like, let's be real, William, most of them don't even know about FAFSA or what that means to sign on that line to get a loan, or if they're even eligible for loans because of the confinement or where they're at in the process or upon release. So there's just a lot of issues surrounding this topic that, if you want to be truthful, we really need to discuss and address, and to say, like, let's be transparent. This is what this really means. This is what you're signing up for. This is what it's going to look like for the rest of your life. It's going to affect your credit score. It's going to affect you trying to purchase a home or trying to purchase a vehicle later on in life. So there's all these factors that do come into play when you're talking about like student loan debt and how it affects you and your family and your community.
Thank you everybody for sharing that. And so recently also the Student Borrower Protection Center, they released a report. They did a study of some 55 students who are carrying student loan debt. And they reached a conclusion that said it was inevitable that 100% of them would end up in student loan debt forgiveness. So I'm wondering if we could take a little bit of time and talk about these programs. So from your perspective, how do you think student debt forgiveness programs could contribute to promoting social and economic equity for incarcerated people? And what potential benefits or opportunities you think could arise from such initiatives? I'll start that one with Alexa.
I'll just start off the top, making it where right now, from my understanding of the student loan debt forgiveness, is if you qualify for this XYZ factor, working for a nonprofit, 60 non-missed payments, there's certain criteria or benchmarks that you have to check these boxes in order to qualify for the loan debt. Like Omari says, 20,000, and whoever's making these decisions is not taking into account other factors of, how long has it been? How long have you been paying on it? The interest charged on it, the consolidation of the debt crediting services that's calling you, wanting to get this start. I mean, so in order for this to really make an impact, we need to stop pinpointing and creating these like imaginary benchmarks or check marks that you have to qualify for in order to get forgiveness for this. You can only do it, William, if you get this. You can only qualify if you're here, if you've done this. we really need to find out, I mean, and it's really difficult to understand. Like, do I really qualify? What does this mean? Oh, I don't work for a nonprofit. Oh, but I did work for a nonprofit. Oh, I have paid 60 months, but then they were deferred because, so it's really confusing. So the first step I think we should be is to be transparent and to kind of have a basic understanding of where everything is and what the expectations are.
And I know for me, like when I heard about public service loan forgiveness and things of that nature, I thought it was a good thing. But then I started hearing about all the issues with people actually accessing that, people who had dedicated their lives and made career decisions based on that and still didn't get that forgiveness when they thought that it was time for it to come. So it sounds like a lot of those forgiveness programs have been a big mess, and at the end of the day, they look at a lot of these programs like they're giving somebody a gift, right? Like, okay, we're giving you the gift of forgiving this debt that you're supposed to be paying. But what if instead we just looked at education as a human right and something where, individuals who came from the gutter, who came from the bottom, this is one of our only means to be full members of the economy, full productive members of society, right? When we become educated. So it should just be attached to being a citizen, of this country, rather than you got to put in 10 years, you got to make payments for 20 years, things of that nature. So like those programs, it does give some people a way out, but they just don't go far enough. It shouldn't take a decade or two in order for me to feel some relief, and like I said, I willingly took on these loans, but I had no idea, like when it was at a couple $1,000s, what it was going to spiral into, at the end of my road.
No, thank you
And
for
just
that.
to say something, when I was inside, they would always say that education was a privilege and a right. Alexa, going to school or getting ready to go to college for the day, it's a privilege, not a right. It's a privilege, not a right. And you're right, Omari, education should be just a human right and a necessity.
I know when I was in default on my student loan, one of the critical things that occurred in my experience is having the right people in place advising you. When I first started attending Goucher, GPEP in the prison, Pell Grants again wasn't around, and Goucher was independently raising funds to pay for our education. But Amy Rosa was such a leader that at that time she had me involved with just paying $5 a month, sending that to the Department of Education to get me out of default. And I didn't know that when I got released some few years later, that was going to really be important, because when I decided to go to the main campus, the first thing I was confronted with was whether I was in default on my student loan. And I had paid like maybe 3-4 years consecutively, and they hadn't taken me out of the default status yet. They had completely mismanaged at the Department of Education my loan, and they were sending me all these threatening letters. And Amy and I were on the phone together, and she knew, I think it was a 6-month consecutive payment rule. She knew I had paid because I used to give them the receipts of all my payments and keep a copy too. Well, fast forward, they kept telling me this stuff, and I finally said to the lady on the phone, I said, ma'am, let me speak to a supervisor. When she let me speak to a supervisor, the supervisor went into my history somewhere in their computer system and found all of my payments. The lady that I was talking to, she wasn't going past like maybe, let's just say, for example, 1 or 2 screens. And those 2 screens was like recent and, well, you don't meet the standard, et cetera, et cetera. But when the other lady went into the history, she said, oh, I can send you a letter now. You should have been received your letter because you've been paid, I think the amount that you should pay consecutively in order to get out of default. And I know we're talking about forgiveness on student loans, but I think it's too critical because so many people incarcerated are in default that advocates definitely have to take up the charge and figure out ways to help get the students out of default first. Because most people who on this side of the fence that want to advocate for forgiveness, if we even get it, don't want to probably forgive a person who's already in default, if I'm making sense.
Yes. So I just want to be clear for the people listening. What you mentioned was there's a woman who was at the HEP program who assisted or had folks assist you with coming into good standing with your student loan debt with that $5 a month. Someone from the college was sent to do that work with you. Is that what you were saying?
Amy herself, Amy Rosa.
So for folks who don't know who Amy Rosa is,
the director, at that time, she was the director of the Goucher Prison Education Partnership.
thank you. So, I mean, really quickly, before we jump to affirmative action, so it sounds like this is a slippery slope, Omari, Alexa, Kenard. It sounds like this is a slippery slope, but with Pell being reinstituted, and we know that there are some numbers, I think some numbers like 760,000 people in prison will be eligible for Pell Grants, for free college with Pell expansion. I'm wondering, considering that, you know, all of you have spoke about this slippery slope, if someone would speak for, you know, just one of you, someone who could speak to this. Why is this still important? Why is Pell expansion such a big deal? Are we calling for that?
Go ahead.
Go ahead, man.
No, go ahead.
So if I can understand your question correctly, are you asking at this state 2023, why is it still important that incarcerated persons be given funds or adequately funded to pay for their education?
Yeah, and I'm glad you reworded the question, because the question I'm asking is, why is Pell expansion so crucial for low-income communities? I'm going beyond at the individual level, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you could speak to, if this is your story, how does higher education, given this slippery slope and this ability to fall into this debt if you're not careful, if you don't have proper advisement, if the college is not doing their due diligence to work with us as a population versus traditional college students, how is this so crucial, like this Pell expansion, and what would you speak about?
In my life experience, right? So I come from 10th and W Street, Northwest in Washington, D.C. At the time, an all-black block where hardly anyone had post-secondary education. Quite a few people experienced living in a single-family household. A woman was the head of the household. People were struggling to get by. Hardly any professional workers on the block. So to change that description of people from my block, it is so important for people that are still living in those situations where it is a all-black neighborhood, poverty-stricken, living below the poverty line, no professional jobs, no one in the family has gotten past a high school diploma, if they even got a high school diploma. So, and those people, in my opinion, William, are the ones that end up incarcerated. Those people are the ones that end up living such a difficult life when it comes to making progress in social mobility that the brother referred to early. So it is still important to fight and fight like hell to see that people are educated, not only like the incarcerated person, but all poor people and people that are middle class and people that just can't afford access to education. I think I remember, I'm going back to Amy Rosa again, the director of GPEP. I remember her telling a correctional officer one time when we were in Goucher, correctional officers were allowed to attend class too. And she told them that they had done some research, and what they had found, people from their neighborhood, although they had a good job working in state government, that they were underrepresented in post-secondary education. And Goucher was trying to provide a solution for that by allowing them to attend school at their work site to bring some parity to a situation that is very unfair. That's one reason why, William, I think it is critical that we continue to fight and even talk about pay.
I appreciate that. So if we could, let's pivot for a second here and switch to affirmative action. Specifically, there's been a lot about the interpretation of what the Supreme Court actually even said or did. The just cause rule around diversity, did they take that away, or has it just been now harder to establish because there has to be some sort of measure made at the institutional level for a specific population, preferencing for them to use race as a factor? I'm wondering if we could just for a minute here, how do the folks on this panel believe affirmative action has influenced diversity and inclusion within educational institutions or workplaces in reference to justice impacted people? Alexa, Omari, anybody?
Sure. I read a lot of information and prep for this, and everyone had a different understanding of what the Supreme Court ruling really meant. And that was very loose. Some say it doesn't outright ban affirmative action. It's more of like, it can't use solely on the basis of and XYZ. For me personally, the Supreme Court decisions created uncertainty and raised questions about the potential impact of the experience for the incarcerated learner. College classrooms inside the prison across the country don't resemble the demographic of the prison overall. And that's just like one really blatant example of it. Just like it's clear as night and day, the demographic of the prison's overall population is not represented in the college classrooms and the programs that exist right now. So affirmative action, how is that going to affect us? We need to increase advocacy and advance policies to promote equity across higher education in the prison space, because it's all going to trickle down and affect what this is going to look like for incarcerated learners in general upon release as well.
I would tell you this, right? I've done time in state prisons and in the Federal Bureau of Prisons, right? And the Federal Bureau of Prisons is more racialized. I mean, it is a wicked bastion of evil. I have been in prisons where the entire staff was white, and there's no way that anyone in America can tell me that the Federal Bureau of Prisons can't do a better job in recruiting minorities and women. I can't understand to save my life how you can go right up in Western Maryland and Cumberland, Maryland, the state of Maryland, where there are so many Blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans living, and go to a federal institution and only 2 Black people are employed there. So that's a situation where I believe the BOP intentionally exclude people, and sometimes it's done in sex through crafty ways, like building a prison in neighborhoods where minorities are completely uncomfortable with living. It's not our fault. We just put it, and why do you always put it in that particular place then? That's one way I look at it. Another thing, and this is more difficult, but you can go to a place like Jessup where the racial composition of the staff flips to a majority of Blacks, but then the place is filthy. Some of the services are subpar. It's just a nightmare in terms of adequately servicing the people there. And you ask yourself, does and this is what I'm told about Maryland prison system. You can go to Hagerstown and you got maybe 1 or 2 Black people employed there, and they have all the resources there. They got vocational training. They have enough case managers for everybody to be classified in a timely manner and given their release, and everything is, the flip. And then adequate down Jessup and a lack of funding where Black people are. So that's just one discussion. But I just think the affirmative action piece overall is with the Supreme Court in a prior case, giving it 25 years, putting it on a lifespan of 25 years, it definitely needs to be around a little longer. And the strict scrutiny test that they are now applying just makes it that much more harder legally and that much more easier for places who want to discriminate against people.
I know we're at time now, so I'll keep it succinct. This country was built on racial harm. This country was built on intentionally inflicting wounds upon certain groups of people. And I feel like the solutions to those problems, really the only real solution is revolution, and I don't see that coming anytime soon. So like a lot of these things, affirmative action, stuff that sounds nice in practice, but I haven't seen widespread change based on it. So if we're asking about like how that has impacted access to higher education for formerly incarcerated people, I personally don't know of any examples. And that's not to say that I'm advocating against affirmative action or anything. I just have not personally heard of an example of an individual who was formerly incarcerated who ended up, accepted to their college based on affirmative action. It doesn't mean that doesn't happen. I just personally don't have awareness of that. So, and in my state, affirmative action has been banned for a long time, the state of Washington. So yeah, I think a lot of this stuff is just, it's not getting us to the ultimate goal that we're really chasing.
Agreed. And thank you for circling back, Omari, because I do understand that affirmative action is banned in the state of Washington. Has also been banned for over 20 years in Texas. And I also want to just flag that I appreciate, Kenard, you bringing in the demographics of hiring practices at the institutional level, but I also want to just mention the omission of mentioning how it affected incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people. It is also needs to be stated, because it's perfectly legal to discriminate and not include people with criminal backgrounds in the workplace and in educational systems. We just went through a series years ago with banning the box on the common applications at public institutions, removing the question, but that didn't do much to increase equity and inclusion for folks who look like you and I. And so much so that now we're at a point of advocacy with Pell rolling out that we want to be clear. One of the things that came out of the negotiated rulemaking process, the last one, was that institutions had to offer the type of education on the inside and offer individuals to take that same education on the outside, because we've had stories and cases where a school was sponsoring a smaller program at the institution, and then that person get out, and that bigger college won't admit that person due to them being a felon. So, and I just want to end that part in terms of affirmative action, because it misses us. It has missed us. We're not considered in Title IV, with the exception of some states. Some states are moving some legislation. Atlanta, Illinois, Pennsylvania are moving some language. I think Maryland had some language that didn't make it out of first committee around protected class status, entering folks with criminal backgrounds into a protected class so that those things cannot be used in perpetuity, which is just another word that was used in Lincoln's time, Abraham Lincoln, to substantiate the continuation of slavery. But I'll end my rhetoric with that part. And then to the closing, we've gone over a few minutes, but I just want to end on a point. As directly impacted individuals, and make this like a sentence, couple of sentences, and let's take this home. as directly impacted individuals, what advice or recommendations would you offer to policymakers, educational institutions, or employers to create more inclusive and equitable environments for underrepresented individuals? Here, I'll remove the dog whistle term and say justice impacted people. Omari?
Yeah, I can go first on that one. So the recommendation that I would give is be specific about who you intend to serve and who you intend to benefit from your policies. If you mean Black people, don't say BIPOC. If you mean formerly incarcerated people, don't say marginalized people. You know, like, be really specific in your policy with your language, because everything's up for interpretation. And I feel like that's where a lot of stuff goes astray. There's these bills and these policies with great intentions, then they're interpreted one way and they don't end up having the intended impact. To be honest, I think sometimes that's intentional. Sometimes it's about box checking. You can say that you got a policy passed or a bill implemented, things of that nature, but I want to see the outcomes on the other side of that. So just be real specific about who you intend to serve.
Alexa?
I would say that these challenges didn't appear on their own. They just didn't come out of thin air. You know, this is our history, and it's going to take a concentrated, consistent effort from all relevant stakeholders to get together and really push this agenda. There's power in the rooms. What happens is everyone's working in a silo and everyone's focusing on things of the state or things that affect their community. We need to look at the bigger picture and just think, if we just pull all our resources together, we can make change. And policy and advocacy and philanthropy and all that goes together, and we can't have one without the other. So I do think that change is possible. And I am conscious of, damn it, it has to be better than this.
Kenard?
For policymakers, I would say, be honest to your constituents. The time of misleading people is over. Because you're an incarcerated person, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to make the community safer. We had extensive research from Sandtown, Winchester, and Baltimore, who over-incarcerated their citizens and still had a very unsafe neighborhood. When you incarcerate people and you put them in dysfunctional, violent institutions, and people go there with trauma and leave with trauma, you're not doing your constituents a fair and decent job. It's actually a disservice. So if you are going to incarcerate people, make sure that the institutions have the resources in place to deal with trauma, to deal with undereducation, and to deal with all the root causes that go into people committing crimes from the first place. So just be honest for a change and stop being so dishonest to your constituents.
So I appreciate that. So it sounds like what we've attempted to do in 30 minutes, little over 30 minutes, is talk about equity in policymaking. Be clear in the language. The language has caused enough confusion and tends to subvert race. And we know that race has been criminalized. So we're talking about subvert justice impacted. And be honest in that legislative intent. Leverage institutions, colleges, whomever, when employers, right? When considering bringing on, and I gotta say this from my own lived experience with Ed Trust, and shout out to Kayla Elliott, who worked with me immensely from the beginning and tolerated the traumas, the inconsistencies and of ethics and work practices that I just didn't have, right? I just didn't have those, right? And I did have a manager at that time, a supervisor, who had the ability or the willingness to pivot and take a different position and also learn. So it's like, leverage those resources if you're gonna support this community of justice impacted people beyond educational curriculums, right? Use the other resources that traditional college students have access to. If a college campus is offering free mental health sessions, like there's a set, when you go onto a college campus, they're like, you qualify for 9 one-on-one sessions with a therapist. Bring that into the institutions, make that available. clear information. Kenard was speaking about with the FAFSA. Be clear about what a person is getting into when they're getting out of student loan debt and potentially getting into up-to-date debt that in Omari's case will last, beyond his life as he sees it now. So these are some of the bullet points that that I wanted to highlight and bring out of that. We do not have, we had one, just to go to the Q&A real quick. Okay, so we do. We have a question here. Someone is asking, what does affirmative action mean again? Sorry, it was long. It was a long-winded definition. What does affirmative action mean? Anybody want to take that? Or
So affirmative action is in the content of like resources, it's individuals belonging to a group regarded as disadvantaged or subject to discrimination. So what the affirmative action ban did was saying Judge Roberts is, it's pages and pages long, but it's basically saying individuals belonging to a certain class or a certain type or a certain disadvantaged or marginalized community, you cannot use that as a basis for enrollment in colleges for the affirmative. It was Harvard in North Carolina versus, they were petitioning saying, just because I'm a brown or Hispanic or Latin, or however you want to call me, you cannot say, I take preference over someone else because of my race, or if I'm a woman or something to that effect. So they're like banned it. They can't use that solely on it. I can talk about me being Latina in my admissions essay, but don't use that as a factor in considering whether you will admit me into your college.
Yep. And so just to be clear, I want to be clear that the question is answered. So affirmative action and meaning, I'm believing that's what the question is asking, not interpretation as it was through the Supreme Court, but to Alexa's first part of her definition was that it was a policy aimed at increasing opportunities for people who will otherwise be underrepresented in certain spaces. And using race as a factor, because race doesn't exist in a vacuum. Race is made up a system of inequities, right? Housing, food support. Someone in the Q&A had put something around SNAP benefits, getting hard to get SNAP benefits. So I see a thank you. So that was answered. So if there are any other questions, we want to take a brief moment here to use the Q&A. And if not, I'll give it a second or so. Answer live. Okay. It doesn't look like we have any Q&A, but I want to thank the three of you for joining me in this. I hope that this is not the last time, and I appreciate the build up to get here. One of the missions at EdTrust is to amplify, uplift the voices of directly impacted people, and this is not a dog whistle term. Formerly incarcerated, justice impacted, however you want to say it, people who have experienced the criminal legal system, is to uplift and amplify our voices and them, hosting this event and getting behind us and meeting with us to carry this out is an example of what that looks like. And I appreciate it. So thank you. I will give the rest of you your night back, and I'll be in touch because I did like the build up to this and reading through the case and learning that Kenard was reading 211 pages of the case. And we need more of that, right? We need more of that. So hold on, we have some Q&A that came in. It said, what kinds of work? So really quickly before we go, last thing, what kinds of work are each of you doing in your community? Let's start with Omari.
Yeah, so I do quite a bit. As far as employment, I'm the director of teaching and advancement at a Seattle-based nonprofit called Choose 180, where we do some national work, bringing system and community-based organizations, community leaders together to, talk about pressing issues and potential solutions where systems can transfer some of their power and resources to those community leaders. I also teach criminal justice at the University of Washington, and I mentor youth through Pierce County Juvenile Court, which is the county that I live in, and the youth that I mentor are all African-American youth who have been in trouble for some pretty serious crimes, robberies and things of that nature. So just kind of trying to be that positive male presence that they didn't have, that I didn't have growing up, and expose them to new things. Like this weekend, we'll be taking a group of kids to Seahawks training camp. We'll be having we'll do some workshops, and we're also going to do a service activity where we hand out some packages at an encampment. And then we're going to take them to ride on a boat on Lake Washington, you know, just get some experiences that they never could get outside of engagement with folks like me. So just using my story, I do a lot of public speaking. Like I said, I'm an author, a lot of different events that I participate in. So if you ever have a need for a voice like mine, reach out.
Kenard?
For a living, I'm employed at the Office of the Attorney General, District of Columbia Government and Consumer Protection. And what I do essentially is District of Columbia residents submit complaints to us that they have from the business community. And the complaint can be as something as small as a senior citizen ordered food from Manny and Ogle, and the food wasn't delivered, or something happened and they want a refund, and the business is giving them a difficult time. And when they file a complaint with us, I research, investigate, find out if the complaint is valid. I've been on the job since January 30th. I have put almost $38,000 back in the pockets of District of Columbia residents by advocating for them in this consumer process. Personally, in the community, I just published a collection of poems called Below DC's Black Poverty Line. I did a recital at Busboy in Port last week, and I'm just trying to get my feet wet in the community doing advocacy work. And I'm using my poetry as a medium to communicate to the community issues of race, poverty, history. I'm not just using poetry to entertain people. I use it as mainly as a tool to educate people. So and I'm looking to get more involved. We got 57% of returned citizens in the District of Columbia homeless. That's a huge problem for us here in the District of Columbia, returned citizens being homeless. So I'm looking to do some advocacy work in the coming days around that issue. Thank you.
Alexa?
I'm an advocate for the Pell implementation and what that's going to look like on the state level in Texas. We just finished our legislative session where we had written like statute and law that didn't get passed for guidelines in what Pell implementation looks like, how it's to be equitable, especially for ladies in their carceral setting. The education opportunities for them are very limited, and we just want to make sure that quality programming, education, and is done in a transparent way, and working with relevant stakeholders in Texas and in trying to get, you know, transparency and community involved in decision-making policies. So that's what I've been working on for the past about 2 years. So it's still not over yet.
No, thank you for that. And I also put the link to Kenard's book in the chat for everyone to see. Me, as I said, I work with Ed Trust to bring this lived experience to policymaking, but in my day life, because I can't cut it off, I mentor young folks, I speak to young people. I just spoke to a group of 50, and I don't use terms like at risk, because we're all at risk of certain ethnicities and racial backgrounds. In addition, I sit on the Alumni Association Committee at the school that I got my undergrad from to ensure that we are attempting to build a prison to school pipeline and truth. I was also the recipient of the prison to school pipeline of a master's degree, a master's program at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, where I am working with them to, one, understand what it means to work with us as a population, but to increase more bodies in that environment to gain those credentials and knowledge bases so we can go back and teach that. In a nutshell, we also do like a men's meet out here in the community where we meet with men who are also formerly incarcerated, who may not have these opportunities we have. just to ensure that they have a means of venting and getting other options besides the normal responses to conflict. So there's some mediation work going on in Baltimore City that I'm a part of. I founded an organization called Raw Trust. I'm the board president. I'm one of three. We found that organization about 2.5 years ago. We just did a first viewing of a documentary we received some funding to work on called Pay Up and Get Out of the Way. It's a documentary about reparations in Baltimore City and the need to have it. But I hope that answered some questions. And again, all our panelists, if you can right now, if everyone could drop your contact information in the chat, and we'll end on that note.
You know, what's wrong with this girl, Hussein?
What is it? It's not working for you?
Yeah.
You got it or no?
It's only going to hosts and panelists for me.
Oh, I'm doing to everyone. You should be able to click on the box for everyone.
No, that option's not there.
Okay,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
let me get this real quick. So
Share the screen, video.
I got you. So I just dropped everyone's email in the chat.
Oh, okay, you got me saying. I appreciate it.
Yep.
Hey, you know what? That's
So
my.
with that, I will let
Don't worry
everyone
about
go.
it.
And thank you. This is not the last. This is certainly the first of many more you'll hear from us. Again, we're not going away. We are humans and we are alive and agents. Be well.
Thank you.